Well, hello and welcome to episode 172 of the ANF podcast, or the Adoption and Fostering podcast, or whatever we want to call it these days, from the ANF network. With me, Scott Cass and Rennie, your man there.
Al Coates. How the hell are you?
I don't know. I don't know where I am, what I'm doing.
It's the
I'm on
summer.
this podcast, I'm on that podcast, I'm working, I'm away on holiday, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the next thing. I genuinely do not know. And also, you don't have a cap on, so I think that's thrown me.
Oh, I can find my hat.
Well, no, because normally, so we've gone from Marv from Home Alone to not Marv from Home Alone.
It's not a good look.
That's better. See, that's...
Yeah, I've got a great face for podcasts.
Anywho, how are you, Cozy?
I'm all right. I'm 2 working days away from my summer holiday, and do you know what I've realised?
You say summer holiday, we say still dabbling.
Well, no, I'm going to be really good this year because I've purposefully not booked in any podcast recordings for conversations or anything else. I'm going to get all my editing done. I reflected on how I actually feel about August. And what I've discovered on doing some self-reflection and having a really serious think is that actually I don't like August. And do you know why?
Go on. I'm interested to know why.
Because August has a real hint of melancholy about it.
Mm-hmm. I would kind of agree with that. Mm-hmm.
So you've got May, June is just like, oh, this is the summer. This is it. The long days, the sunny weather, the beautiful. July is like, oh, it's kind of, oh, right, we're in the summer now. And then August is like, it's going to end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like September because September feels like, all right, changes are coming. Right. I love September. It's also
fresh. It's fresh.
Fresh mornings, crisp. Something quite nice. But August is melancholy. So so there's a few things I'm doing, and I haven't told you this. I've been keeping it secret. No, it's not like, it sounds like it's an announcement.
Who cares?
It's not.
Who are you to make yourself sound important? Go on.
Well, I've just had this desire to walk Hadrian's Wall.
Oh, go on.
You're disappointed by my announcement?
No. Just go on. Crack on. Tell me about it, and then I'll tell you.
The thing is, I've been on and off planning it, and different things happened, and circumstances. So probably this time last year. So this last year's summer holiday, I broke my finger on the first day, and my dog died on the last day.
We remember it well. It was
bleak, bleak holiday, and I just thought, I was thinking about how to plan doing Hadrian's Wall because you can go west to east or east to west, and I live in the east. I live 10 miles from Wallsend, which is, took him ages to think of a name for that place. So I was thinking in my head that I would go west to east and then finish close to home, and then that would be it. And I'm going to do a day at a time over between now and Christmas. And I was just kind of like, oh, it doesn't quite fit. And then I had this is where I'm getting a bit metaphysical, a bit existential, a bit something. And I thought to myself, what I really want to do is the idea of starting in Wallsend and walking away from home just really connected. And that's like, so, when I said that out loud, I realized how it sounded.
Please tell me you said that in an empty room.
I'm in an empty room. How to get divorced on a podcast. And it just really connected with me. So I'm going to take Esther, my dog. We're going to do about 15 miles a day, and we're going to do one at the beginning of the holiday, one at the end of the holiday, and then we'll get the other 3 done over the next few months. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm going to get up early, do it at 6 o'clock. I'll be done by lunchtime, sort of thing. Yeah. And I'm taking
that's interesting. That is interesting because many moons ago, and I say many moons, I actually signed up to do that walk. Believe it or not, for a charity. But it never went ahead.
Well,
and I always regret that. There was only 5 or 6 years ago. Not going to mention the charity. But yeah, it was...
Home for Good.
No. But yeah, it never happened. I mean, we did... I can't remember why it didn't happen anyway. But I actually regret that. So you do this year, and then maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, you could do it all at once.
It's an easy walk. It's not. I mean, I walk it's not. I mean, I think it's if you're not, well, don't walk. It's not easy to walk, but it's not difficult. There's things that connect with you through a lifetime, and there's a book called Ruthless Trust. And I'm going to take it with me. I'm going to stop and read it and have cups of coffee on the way and just really,
why not?
kind of really reset myself, because I feel like it's a time to do that. Lots of changes been. And what does the future hold?
Friggin'
Yeah, so I'm going to spend time with the kids. I'm going to spend time with Mum. She's not very well, so I'm actually quite looking forward to it. And I'm not going to do what I usually do, which is like, I'll just look at my computer, and I'll just
because you are very bad for that. You are very bad for that. You are very, very bad for that.
Yeah, so you might get texts from me up a hill, kind of going, Scott, I have had a thought. Who are we? Why are we? Anyway, enough of that. But anyway, what are you've been away and you've been busy and you've been doing, and it's a summer. This is going to be a long episode, this one, because we spoke to Avery Bowser for an hour. We're going to pluck that in at the end. But Scott, let's just lean into it. Let's just have a long episode. It's the summer episode. Scott,
why not?
What have you been up to? How are you? How are you really?
Question.
How really? How are you? I'm going to social work it. How are you really?
Well, I've got I've got my annual event coming up, haven't I, in September? So I'm really not looking forward to that, but kind of looking forward to it at the same time, because I get 3-4 days on my back, and after it. So essentially, that's my annual checkup. So Anyway,
it is like an MOT. It's like
it literally is. It's an MOT on my brain to make sure that it's all still there. And of course, you know what? You do kind of like, I'm not worried about the actual procedure. I'm just worried afterwards. He might say, actually, there's a little snag here. And that's kind of my worry. But anyway, I am looking forward to having my feet up for a few days. So, and it's been a quiet summer, which it normally is for organizations like ours, because obviously people are on holiday. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
So we're making the most of it, taking the opportunities. It's still been busy because obviously we do this podcast, as you will know because you are here most of the time. The FASD Ireland podcast, that's second episode went out today, which was an interview with Jacob, but I wasn't involved in it, which was quite interesting. Listen back.
I love the way his accent transitioned from
I know,
brogue
hilarious.
Back to himself.
It was hilarious, yeah. And what is interesting, because obviously Rob has left us as a team member now, but he still wants to do elements of the podcast, and we're going to do that. But it's because Rob was there that he went into this deep kind of Irish kind of, I don't know. But then he soon came out of it. By the end of it, he sounded completely English again. So it's quite funny.
It's a chameleon, that boy.
Absolutely. But but things like, he turned 17, he's passed his theory test, we applied, that's come through, blah. Yeah, so my baby isn't a baby anymore. So it's a summer of transitions for us as well, because we're now getting to that, and he's in his last year of school this year, and then hopefully he'll go off to university or do whatever he wants to do. And so it's kind of one of those summers where you just think, ugh, because it's been going on since like 2021, because your school holidays are so long. Literally, they're 3 years long at this stage. And he goes back for 2 hours on the 28th in the afternoon. And then he goes back a couple of days later properly. I'm just like, what's the point in that? What is the point? What's the point?
But just to allay the young people's fears, and just to let them in gently. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. So yeah, but all good otherwise. All good.
Excellent. So very ruefully, we arranged a podcast with Avery Bowser off the back of the book, The Future of Children's Social Care. And rueful, because you weren't able to attend at the last moment, your circumstances overtook you.
They did.
You made the executive decision for us to proceed bravely without you.
And can I just say, in case Avery is listening, always wanted to talk to him, but never had the opportunity. Now, still don't have the opportunity. So there you go. And I always it's funny because, can I just tell a little story here about the word Avery? When I used to work in retail, that's all I could think about, because Avery is a name of weighing scale. So when I used to see the name Avery Bowser, on Twitter. I used to think he was a pair weighing scale. I didn't really, but it just kind of...
There's link. Before we
Sorry,
go on
Avery.
any further, he'd be fine.
Yeah.
He's got broad shoulders. Before we go on, Scott, you, about 3 weeks ago, you messaged me and you went, I'm laughing. I've just remembered something that I need to share on the podcast. And I said, write it down. And you went, I'll write it down. So what is it?
I can't remember.
You idiot. I knew you would do that.
I did put it in the notes, didn't I? What was it?
I don't know. But shall I? You look for it and I'll tell you, I'll let you multitask. So
I'll try.
I'm not going to go through what we talked about with Avery, but it was off the back of that. There's a couple of reflections and things I wanted to that came away from me, and I do mention it in the interview. One was that really this sense of us, the review of children's care, really missing the ball for adoption, actually. And it was off the back of the chapter that Avery had written in the book. If adoption is the answer, what is the question? And it really made me think that actually, have we come to a point where we're actually saying that the review of children's social care is kind of just a dud? It's just a dead in the water. That is it going to? You're pulling a face there as you're looking at that. You're reading your notes. And so it really made me think about that. And we sort of do chat about that as well as other things. But then this sort of, and it linked back to what we'd said to Paul Shuttleworth a few weeks earlier when he was talking about his chapter. So firstly, we need to get John Radu on to talk about his chapter because he did fostering. But this idea that how do we then lobby the incoming government to actually get something that's meaty? Because it feels like up till now, it's just all been a bit piecemeal. It's all been a bit meh. And then out of the blue, Scott, I got an email.
Oh.
It's my Friday evening email from Home for Good. Wasn't that a wonderful segue? And they were so I've stopped answering them because I think I was causing genuine distress amongst the comms team.
That's probably why they've never agreed to come onto the podcast since Mr. Kandaya finished up.
I can honestly say that after the next 5 minutes, they may not come on ever. Because I felt quite irked by the whole thing. So they were giving us notification that they were starting a campaign in terms of asking the incoming government to lobby the incoming government, whoever they are, whoever wins, to sort of commit to seeing change from the top down, sparking systemic improvements, and actually to lobby. And so they've got what they've described as 5 asks. So shall I go through the 5 asks for you, Scott, and you can tell me what you think about them.
Would you like me to comment on each one as you go? Or?
If you could do that, yeah. And again, I mean, oftentimes we do sit on the fence. I sit on the fence. I know you do, but I think we can speak honestly. I do sit on the fence. Yeah, I do sit on the fence. But I kind of feel like that the stakes are really high, and I think Home for Good is an organisation that's got a huge influence, and they pulled together all-party parliamentary select groups, haven't they? And
not just on their own, but
but they've active secretariats and they've also funded that. So they've got influence and they're kind of well connected into different people who are influential in the sector, like MPs and the like. So the first ask is to raise the profile and encourage the use of supported lodgings for children. Activate local authorities to commission services and encourage members of the public to come forward as hosts so that teenagers in care are no longer housed in appropriate accommodation. I don't have a problem with that. Bit vague.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Right, this is the next one. So everyone who's enjoyed the podcast up to now, in all of the things we've done, if this means that you have to then no longer listen to us, that's fine. Ask 2, statutory adoption pay for self-employed adopters.
Is that not been done somewhere else? And what has that got to do with Home for Good? Confused.
Well, I think it's an interesting issue because I think that it's an issue of equality. I don't think it's an issue of oppression. I think it's an issue of that there are 13% of the population are self-employed, or 13% of the working population are self-employed. Mm-hmm. And I think, right, you're a national charity and you're picking up this as an issue. I did some really basic maths, maybe 300 people a year, 350, whatever. 390 would be 13% of the number of 3,000 adoptions a year. And I just think, to me, this is an issue of equality, and we should absolutely have equality, but actually it is an issue that we should be putting huge amount of resources in and lobbying government for. Is it?
No, I can see your point with that, because actually, if you're lobbying a new government, which is likely to be, let's be honest,
Let's
it's
be
not likely
hopeful.
to be the same government, is it? Then surely you need to be kicking a little bit higher than. And no offense to anybody who's self-employed. This is
Absolutely.
absolutely nothing against you. We know, we get it. And to be honest, having been self-employed and being an adoptive parent is not easy. But this is not something that affects the majority of families that come through the adoption system. So for me, for a national charity to be no, oh,
I guess the thing for me is it feels a little bit disingenuous to say that, and I absolutely think there should be equality, and I think
yeah,
that
I agree.
I think it's a bit of a bureaucratic round robin because this department says it's us and it's them, and the other department says it's them.
But they always
so it goes
do
round
that.
in circles.
It's actually
They always do
BS,
that.
all that stuff, isn't it? Just
It
work
is, yeah.
together, work with the other departments to get it sorted. There you go. There's a solution.
Yeah. And for me as well,
President.
it's been equated actually with the number of children waiting, and I think that actually that this isn't the reason why people aren't adopting. I think it may be for a very small number of people, but it's a tiny number, and this isn't the issue that's going to fix the other issues. So that's complicated. People may have very strong feelings about that, and if you're a self-employed prospective adopter, you will have a strong feeling about that.
Yeah.
And absolutely, you should have equality. But should a national charity with influence and money be making this kind of a flagship part of what they want to do? I don't know. Right. So we were going well in with Home for Good. They're never coming on. And but they can come on and tell me I'm an idiot. That's fine. We'll have them back on to tell us we're idiots, wouldn't they? Wouldn't we?
Well, to tell you you're an idiot, but not me.
Well,
I'm not an idiot. But yeah, I mean,
well, just have to be on social media to discover that's an ongoing, I think it's a thread. It's just kept going for years.
I've actually got a Google alert on that for Twitter. Where the words are used. Yeah.
For me, not you.
No, just you. Yeah. Why would I be mentioned? I'm very rarely on there these days.
Is that like sport for you to see what people are saying?
Absolutely. Honestly, some of the mentions are just absolutely amazing and hilarious.
Why would you do that? That's like a perverse.
It's like a sport. It's like a sport.
You're honestly a sick man. That's hilarious. What they're saying about him now. Quite true there.
Well, it saves me going looking. It saves me going looking. So I just get a notification and an email.
Yeah, they've got a point there, mind.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that.
No, you can't.
I'll mention that in the next podcast. There you go. Ask 3 is increased engagement with faith groups involved in children's social care. Again, if that feels really vague, because you get one phone call and they've increased engagement. So I feel like improve the experience of. Sorry.
Surely Home for Good is a faith group, and you know yourself that we've had this discussion many times in the past about faith and belief and all that sort of stuff. Now, my impression is that faith groups would work together in the same way that other groups with a similar interest or something common would work together. So why is that in a kind of almost like a manifesto thing? I don't understand.
Well, I think that faith, is there something like a third of people who adopt and foster have a faith or would describe themselves as having a faith of some sort. And I think that's probably an overrepresentation within that community, because the idea of supporting children who don't have parents or can't live with their parents it's a bullseye, isn't it, into kind of that faith value system. And there's an element of it being you shooting fish in a barrel. I could stand up in front of 100 Christians and I could get a message that would really hit home in terms of their core value base. That's not to be dismissive, and that maybe sounds a little bit cynical, maybe it is, but I think that's great. You know, I work with people with faith. I am a person of faith, and so that's fine. But it feels like that's a really vague aim. I just think, come on, specifics. Let's be really specific.
Let's aim a little bit higher.
Absolutely.
And aim higher. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because I was thinking, well, why don't Home for Good become a foster care agency? Because that would be the natural or a adoption agency.
Yeah.
But that's difficult, isn't it? That's complicated. Ask 4, improve the experience of prospective foster carers. Interrogate and address the driving factors that result in 99% of people who inquire about fostering dropping out of the approval process, so that the urgent need for more fostering households can be met. Well, the government are doing that anyway.
see, that seems to me to be something that's not there. Maybe it is. I don't know. They say that 99% of inquiries of people with faith who inquire about adoption, or are they talking generally?
Generally, yeah.
So that's. But yeah, that's.
I mean, the government are doing something. I think they put aside £2 million for a northeast a recruitment hub, that's across the agencies in the northeast. And I think that's due to start in September. That is going to be trialed for a year, and I think there's how I know this, I'm not sure, but there's going to be a study into this. I'm not involved at the moment. that
makes a change. You've normally got your nose into it.
Fingers in pies, me. And so that is that's addressing exactly that, isn't it? And I think that okay.
And you're right. This has been addressed by others. So why?
Oh, are we just being awful to Home for Good?
I don't understand it. I don't understand the lack of now what is it what's the word I would use to describe this? The lack of kind of determination. And what did you say?
Ambition.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Home for Good used to be an organisation that wanted to do things. This to me seems like, oh well, we'll just sit here and we'll say what we want. But I hope to God someone like Adoption UK doesn't come out with a pardon the pun.
See what you did there.
But I hope someone like Adoption UK doesn't come out with a similar kind of thing, because otherwise, what's the point? There's nothing in there about the kind of.
That is a good question. Then, what would you if I said to you, you've got to come up with 5? I'll say the last ask, and then you've got to come up with. Yeah, right. Okay. The last one is increased data collection to monitor patterns of racial disparity.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a real issue, isn't it?
I know. Yeah, it's a real issue, but also it's something else that's been addressed. So the fact that you've just said that fifth one there, it leads me to believe that there's someone else behind this, because we know. Well, wow. Let's be blunt about it. Krish Kandiah didn't he head up some racial disparity group or something like that?
Well, yeah, that was one of his specific goals, and I think that had been set by the government. And one of the reasons he was recruited, because that was something that obviously connected.
So that says to me that he's back having an influence for Home for Good, but the rest of them don't make sense to me, because they're not ambitious enough for an organisation like Home for Good. Yeah. Or is it because they've lost a bit of a grasp over what's going on now? I know myself. Go back 4 years, 5 years. There were some great people there. Somehow, for some reason, they're no longer there. Who knows why? We know that Home for Good are funded. A majority of them, their kind of income comes from the Church of England. We know that,
and giving. And I think that a lot of people in the church faith community give a lot of money. So I think that's
absolutely, yeah. I personally don't have an issue with kind of the faith side of it. You and I have talked about this in some length anyway. I know people that do, especially from my community, because obviously the LGBTQIA plus community, whatever, heavily impacted over the years by the church and what it stands for, etc. And even today, not that long ago, Sandy Toksvig put out a request to Justin Welby to ask him to meet her and blah, blah. But this just seems like a wasted opportunity. If you've got that funding coming from these organisations, the Church of England, all that sort of stuff, why would you not use it to your advantage and aim higher? Absolutely aim higher. We know what the issues are. We know where the issues are. Do you know what? The Church of England could be bloody paying for the Adoption Support Fund to guarantee it, rather than buggering about. And and again, this isn't a criticism of anybody with faith. This is just me thinking out loud and saying, the Church of England could be paying for that rather than paying for 5 very small asks. However, the other thing I say is, if it wasn't for Home for Good, then the Church of England probably wouldn't be as heavily involved in funding an organisation that actually supports people who foster, adopt, etc. But Yeah.
And it's not to downplay the work that they do in that sort of ground level support of families in communities who are fostering and adopting. But I think that the lobbying arm needs to get some teeth. Because I was thinking, right, okay, if you, off the top of my head, if I could have an ask, what would you ask for?
Yeah. What would you? So as somebody with faith who would potentially use Home for Good as well, you have done in the past because God, we've both spoken at their what's it, annual thingamabob. I can't remember.
Yeah, I didn't get invited back though, and I swore on stage.
No, you didn't. But as someone with faith and someone who is that way inclined, who are Mrs. What would you ask if Home for Good be?
My faith. My faith has nothing to do with that. My ask would be informed by what I know of the system. Is that I would say, can we? Right, if I'm going to aim high, I would say that can we have a legislative change in terms of. And this is touched upon in the interview with Avery Bowser. If we're looking for something really specific, is the right to an assessment should be married with a right to have those needs met. So we've got that under the 2004 Adoption Children Act. It says you have a right to an assessment of need, but there's no right to meet that need. Bang on. I would then say, right, in terms of supporting adult adoptees, I would say that really aligns with my sense of faith in the sense of it's an issue of injustice, historic injustice. I would say that then we would campaign to have people who have adult adoptees that experienced adoption, that they would have open door to advocacy and support in accessing their records and lifetime of support. Like it's not been released yet, but when the Irish, we talked about what happened in Ireland, and there's like an open, it's a blank check. If you were adopted, the door is open, and it will be open until every single one of you is dead, which sounds a bit brutal, but that's what they've said. Of course,
that's true. Yeah.
That's just two. I think the one that you said, which kind of like actually said the ASF is guaranteed for the term of the next Parliament.
Yeah. There's other priorities, isn't there? And I think the reason I put that to you was because obviously, well, potentially Home for Good is something that you might have used, your family might have used in terms of.
No, we didn't, honestly. I must welcome.
Well, no, I know, but I'm just saying because you've got, you know me, if I was to have faith, I'd be struck down by lightning and bloody roofs have caved in when I've walked into them. So, that's kind of, that insurance policy was a cracker. But I just believe if you're a national organisation, charity, whatever you are, and you have influence, then you should use that influence to aim high. You need to aim high. You need to, and I think that's maybe what has changed there. I again don't know the setup. Used to be quite close to Home for Good, actually. And as someone, you know yourself, I probably have faith somewhere deep inside me, but realistically, not really, not kind of visible, and not something that I would sit and ponder about.
Spiritual. Shall we call you spiritual?
I don't know if it could. Yeah, I mean, I like spirits in cocktails, so I don't know if that's the same thing. But my point is, having worked alongside Home for Good a couple of years ago, some great people there, finding a kind of a common theme with them and stuff like that, and us all saying the same thing, to going quite basic. So, yeah.
I think what you said was interesting, that what will Adoption UK be doing the same? Because we had Hugh on, and if people want to go back and listen to that episode where Hugh sort of laid out what had happened prior to the 2010 election, where Adoption UK just worked hand in glove with the Conservatives in terms of supporting, of building that. Are Adoption UK doing that now?
Yeah.
Or has adoption had its day in the sun? The other ask I would have is in relation to maintaining family links and contact, which he said cunningly, there's a conference on the 20th of September, which you were invited to, but you can't make. And which is by the National Adoption Strategic Board, which has got open access tickets. So if people want to, we'll put the link in the bio so people can look at that. But issues around maintaining family links, I would say that, there's add some leverage to what the community is saying.
Yeah.
Get
And
some
the thing is, they've been.
oomph.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and slag them off because that's not fair. But they've been secretariat on the APPG for a good couple of years now. They
That's
know
gone,
what's
isn't
going
it?
on.
That's gone.
Yeah, I know, but they were, so they know
Yeah,
what's
they
going
were.
on.
Yeah.
You know, so use your knowledge.
Well, if anyone listens and you're involved with Home for Good, the door is open, and come back and tell us we're wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell it. Help us make sense of that, because we do. It is, it's easy for us to kind of like do you down without a sense of defense, and people can. I'll put the link into the.
He's good at that.
In the bio. I am good at that, but to be honest, I've fallen out with someone before the podcast came on, so I've got all this time to.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a long story. I'll not bore you with it.
You know who you are, person that you fell out with.
You know who you are. It's all good now. But I just think this is the moment where we just as they say, you aim for the stars and you hit the moon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And let's be honest about it right now. Yeah, I mean, the country, I don't live there.
Right.
But the country, there's so much wrong, and God, just aim.
Do you know what we should do?
Do
you know what we should do? We should rustle up our own asks.
Let's do
it.
Should we set up our own political party, the ANF Network Party?
Our political action group, our PAC, and we'll get funding and we'll form a people's army and overthrow the state.
How fabulous. I'm sure it would work.
Yeah, but that'd fill the bank holiday weekend in, wouldn't it? But I mean, even the stuff around, the Fiona Wells and the stuff around adoption disruption and all that stuff, you go, come on, let's. Yeah. A long time ago, at the very beginning of our journey into adoption, there was kind of a pivotal moment in our faith life, and someone really close to me now, but at the time was just someone I knew, an acquaintance, and she said, faith is about. She sort of had put this challenge about faith is meant to. People with faith are meant to have dirty hands. This idea of, are you prepared to have dirty hands? And I think that we need to, from a faith perspective, we need to embrace the ugly issues, the issues that are messy, the issues that don't wrap up nicely and neatly. We need to, get soil under our fingernails and say, well, actually, this is a messy issue. If we're talking about social, right? I'm right. This is it. It's all coming up, the feelings, right? The issue for me as well, if we're talking about faith and about social justice, we're talking about the birth parents, lifetime support for birth parents. Let's aim for the stars. Now, you could argue that they shouldn't get it, but you could also argue from a faith and a justice point of view, that the families that our children come from are families that have had complicated lives and are often young people and parents who should have had support before. The interconnectivity of poverty and children's social care, that's where we should be looking at, and that isn't popular, that isn't nice, that's not all not all fluffy and frothy and pleasant. It's murky. But if we're talking about social justice, from a faith perspective, if your God is a God of justice, then you just have to read the Gospels to see that Jesus he was down with the people who no one else wanted to be down with. He was the one talking to the taxpayers and the drunkards and the prostitutes. He was the first at the party. So this feels like we're just smoothing. It feels like it's nice stuff. It's tickling the ears. Let's get dirty. Let's get our fingernails dirty. Anyway, sorry. I feel like I've totally.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Totally. I feel like you just described us down the drunkards and the taxpayers and the prostitutes.
There's a reason I'm your friend, Scott.
Like you said, if anybody feels that we've bashed Home for Good, then by all means, shout, contact us, prove us, tell us that we're wrong, and more than happy to further. And like I say, as someone who doesn't really think of themselves as having faith, although it's probably deep down there somewhere, like you say, social justice, that's the thing here, isn't it? And if we can't all work together to get that, then we're kind of we're only dabbling, we're only dipping our toe in. We need to literally throw ourselves into that big pool and just crack on.
Or I need to go on some sort of pilgrimage.
I was going to say, I think you need to go and have your blood pressure check because you're looking a bit red on the screen there. But
it's hot. But it just, that is, I guess I don't talk much about myself, but my faith is, I don't go to church very much because my kids bite the edge off pews. But that's the experience of a lot of families who have faith, who then have children who have got complicated stories. Yeah. They're not welcome in church. And all of that sort of stuff is, it's not necessarily our personal experience, but that, and I just think, right, if we're going to do this, we're not going to pay lip service to it and just become this really pleasant, nice thing. Let's get dirty. Let Home for Good do an amazing work with families. But let their political and campaigning arm be something that's spiky and says the things that no one's saying. Yeah, fight. Anyway, sorry, Avery, you've probably been listening going, when is it going to get to me? When is he? Because he probably will have listened all this way, bless him. So shall we whack Avery on? And Scott, I hope you have a wonderful summer. What's left of it.
Well, now that I've been speaking to you for the last hour and you've got my blood boiling, yeah, I'm going to have a fabulous summer. Yeah, thanks for that. It's nearly at an end. School's back next week. 5 days. 5 days.
5 days. Just 5 more days. 5 more days.
5 more days.
5 more days. Excellent. Well, Scott, as always, look after yourself. You remain in the top 10 or 12 favourite people that I know. And as always, the pleasure was all yours.
Absolutely.
Bon Jovi.
Bon Jovi.
Yeah, I think we've lost some friends.
I'd say you've lost some friends. I lose nobody because I don't have any friends.
Well, today we're speaking, well, not we, but Scott was meant to be with me. Today I'm speaking to Avery Bowser, and Avery's written a chapter in the wonderful book, The Future of Children's Care. So, Avery, we invited you on because you wrote this wonderful chapter about adoption. So could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you've got, you've got skin in this game. And tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this chapter on adoption.
Well, I'm a social worker and I'm a fostering services manager for Action for Children in Northern Ireland. So I'm responsible for our services there, making it clear at the beginning that I'm not speaking on behalf of Action for Children today.
Very clear.
But, but even actually, so that's been a theme actually for me through a lot of things that went. I mean, this book was obviously a slight response to the, more than a slight response to the McAllister review. But I mean, I think things around Nolan principles and transparency are really important. So yeah, I do work in fostering and I work for a charity, and I'm a social worker. I'm also an adoptive parent, which was, part of what I was bringing to it. I should also say I'm an active BASMA member as well and sit on BASMA Northern Ireland Committee. So, there was a few pieces there. And I mean, the art that goes to some of the stuff and it's the article because some of it comes from the ask from the wonderful editors, Christian and Robin, was, to do something around adoption, and particularly in relation to the McAllister review and take that as a launch point. But when I started to think about it and look at it, key reference point for me was the work that Breach Featherstone and Anna Gupta did for BASMA around that adoption inquiry. And of course, they are co-authors in this book. It was, I was like part of focus group in that review. A lot of the discussions were very rich that I was involved in, and they stuck with me. And I felt like it was the start of a conversation, and this was another opportunity to kind of say, well, where might we go from here? And again, we may come back to this. Actually, when you look at the book, there's a few parts of it where some of us are saying, quite surprisingly, the McAllister review was really silent on this topic when it was supposed to be, once in a generation, deal with everything. And this one particularly because, and you'll know better than I, because again, and being honest, look, I'm sitting in Northern Ireland, despite the accent, so England isn't the place I work, although obviously you kind of know what's going on, but you'll have much clearer idea of just how the extent to which adoption has been viewed as the gold standard and the center of conservative policy, certainly in that sort of 2010 maybe to 2015 window. And the legacy that's left. So so that was kind of where the response came, and that's a little bit about who I am. And as you can hear, I do not have the strongest Northern Ireland accent going. I grew up in London, but I've been here. It's getting close to 40 years. So I've basically spent my adult life here, and working in children's services and working mostly in the voluntary sector.
I guess I feel like there should be a caveat or a sort of a health warning on this, because you and I are sort of living parallel lives, in that I am I'm a social worker. Not related. We're both bearded, kind of thinning men. We're both.
Doing it on Zoom's a bit scary, because you kind of go,
it is.
Which is my picture.
It's a bit scary. We're both adoptive parents. We're both involved in BASWA. We're both I was involved in the BASWA, the Bridge Featherstone and Anna Gupta kind of review report on adoption. So if you're wanting to criticize this conversation, it's a pretty big target. How wide and broad is it?
Well, yeah. And it is a conversation between us, just an echo chamber, given that we have only known each other through Twitter until this point,
This could be very dull, but we'll work on that. We'll try and stretch out the bounds of it. So, I mean, I would recommend people go and read the BASWA report by Anna Gupta and Bridge Featherstone, because I think that is a fantastic start point.
It's really good. Yeah.
But what I was wanting to do, I bought myself a copy of the book, unlike Scott, who got the chapters sent to him for free. But that we're not going to raise that too much. The thing that really knocked the spots off me, and I have to say, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, is that I came away from it and I got halfway through the first page, and this penny dropped, and I thought, all of the things that I've thought about adoption and all of the things that I've wrestled with through my own experience as an adoptive parent were just not even slightly touched by the review. And the penny hadn't dropped, that they just accepted the status quo. They'd not reviewed it at all. And so I feel I'm almost embarrassed to have just having to read your book to say that. But have I missed something? Was it? I don't know. Was it in the terms? I don't know.
I don't want to do that kind of an embarrassing thing where you refer to other podcasts that you've been on. But I mean, in a way, that was, because when we did the sort of podcast to sort of promote the book with Robin and Christian, that was kind of Christian put that question out, so Avery, why do you think they ducked it? It's just a bit in the chapter as well, because I go, well, it's a really good question, and I don't have any inside track on that. I can only look at it and guess, and I do have some thoughts, and I suppose, I think I start off the chapter by saying, like, adoption's contentious, go figure. We know that, and I suppose that's again, you go back to the Cameron era and that pushing of adoption. It was everybody, like, in the know and in the business, like ourselves, was going, are you kidding? It's not, it can't be all those things. It isn't all those things. It's actually, even before we go to expand it, it's really difficult, and there's things you probably need to reconsider rather before going and saying, take this thing as it is and just, spread it out. I think there's also, look, I'm very publicly on record as a critic of the McAllister review from the outset, and the appointment of Josh McAllister, and and the way it was structured and its over ambition, and it would lead you to look at this and think, well, maybe there was a very serious knowledge and expertise gap in this area. I also wondered in the chapter, some of the public comments from others who've been associated with the stuff over the year, had the penny dropped from them that actually this can't deliver all the things they've said, and they're just quietly pushing it to the side. I think there's a whole thing. Actually, when you read the whole book, there's some recurring themes here that go back to kind of big society ideas, and they're kind of rehashed a bit, I think, in the McAllister review of, like, let's not merely subcontract out to the big private equity boys, but let's go back to the public and help them get us out of this financial hole we're in by doing stuff for free out of the goodness of their heart.
Which is adoption.
Which is adoption, yeah, and is special guardianship.
Yeah.
And is residence or child arrangement orders or whatever new fancy version of that we're going to come up with, or and I suppose that's also, and I suppose that's where the personal really comes in, and it's fueled, as particularly as a social worker, I think, and being on the other side of the table, and realizing what the resource desert looks like.
Yeah.
And sitting in Adoption UK meetings, you're probably familiar with Adoption UK support groups where the coordinator has very usefully spent a lot of time booking somebody to come and speak, and you get like through 50 minutes later of introductions when everybody's basically done a support group task, and the person's now got 10 minutes to deliver what they came to talk. But you'd be sitting there and everybody would be looking at you knowing you were a social worker and thinking, God, if you can't get support, what hope is there for us? And that's and it's really underhand. It's about the night. I said I'd try and be nice. It's about it really is. I mean, it's squelching. And I mean that's about. And I think that's the nerve it hits with lots of things around. So what is the social contract in the society we live in? And adoption is one symptom of that. I think it's So that, I think those are kind of, if you're looking for the analysis of why why I might have said what I said and went for what I went,
No, I mean, I'd encourage people to read it, and because I think that to buy the book and read it, because I think it's a really accessible chapter. You give a history of, you put it in the context of the review, but then you give a history of adoption, and it really made me think that perhaps that adoption is so woven into our culture, from a faith perspective, from a historical perspective, that almost is it almost like a sacred cow that we can't question? And that is why that it was maybe there was no nefarious plot by the review, but just they didn't see it. That they just, it wasn't even, they just, in the midst of all that they were doing, like you're saying, the overreach, that they just didn't say, oh, well, yeah, adoption's fine, but we need to maybe do something around contact, which is contact.
Yeah, well, there was a fit. I think that felt like fig leaf. It was very tokenistic, and even that. I mean, it's like a cliche. Oh, maybe there's a digital solution for that. And I thought, you know absolutely nothing about the complexity of contact in adoption. And I'm not even talking about, talking about contact with siblings. And, the complexity of siblings who are maybe across different types of placement at different times, siblings that are full siblings, siblings that are half siblings, and also realizing, like, the sheer lack of resource that's available to support that.
Yeah.
It's not an easy look, my wife and I certainly went into this with, very open to contact and all that kind of stuff, but it's not straightforward. You can have that attitude, but you can and think, you're not in that. I suppose that was what I charted with the history. We all know the old mindset of the closed adoption and the pretending that this child was born to you in some way, maybe not even telling the child. We're well past that, but the idea that there's some easy kind of relationship connection out here to be done in all the midst of this, that's just magical thinking. And for it to really work very often, it needs a lot of support, and it needs skilled support. And again, I don't see any evidence of anybody jumping forward to pay for that or to value that, or to value what that means to the adoptees. And I suppose that's the other thing I was trying to. I mean, I went in to write the chapter with a little bit of trepidation. because again, I mean, like following you on Twitter and some of the debates that get going, and there's a lot of adoptee anger out there across generations. Some of it, shall we say, some of it very righteous because of and again, this affects children basically being taken from their homes and stuff like that. And I think you were just the other day, there was an article you were kind of reposted there that told exactly that kind of story from Bangladesh. And that is sadly not an uncommon story. And for me, like living here, tied up with things like the laundries and children sent abroad, and I was just reading another thing on the television the last night of what was done with Aboriginal children in Australia. I mean, we're replete with horror stories about how we've treated children as property, and so in the things that we don't value as a society, of which there are many, I don't think we value and don't put our money where our kind words might be around meeting the needs of adoptees in terms of contact with their family and supporting that. And that's not, and I suppose, and I suppose that was the other thing I was trying to tackle head on, because again, there's a lot of anger sometimes at adopters and due to the adopters who do maltreat children, and that does happen, even now. But the rest of us are kind of working in with what we're working in, and I think a lot of us are probably open to the idea of a modern model of adoption. And I suppose that was the crossover for me, because basically the kind of fostering I do amounts to quasi-adoption. So, and you can see what's possible when there's support and there's intensive support, and that continues over years, and you see the kind of good and open-hearted spirit of people who provide alternative care for other people's children, and who are willing to say, well, if there can be, I want to support a relationship if it can happen, and then equally also do the right things when, which is familiar to anybody in fostering and adoption, and particularly who's doing the caring end of it, when a type of contact is being persisted with by a court or social services, that you're saying, this is damaging this child. Can nobody see that? And you do, and you get persecuted for doing the things that the system seemed to want to do in the first place, which was claim the child, treat them like your own. Well, if it was my own child, we wouldn't be turning up twice a week to that, And if it's my own child, somebody would be saying something about that and doing something about that, and not saying, oh, well, I can't do anything because the court's making me do it,
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
but it raises, what you're talking about there is interesting, because I am conscious that we are two adoptive parents talking about adoption, and that is just historic repetition of exactly how adoption's always gone. And you mentioned before we turned the press record, you talked about, you'd seen something on Twitter where I'd sort of said you were coming on, and we, on our Facebook page, on the podcast Facebook page, we have a closed group that's kind of, everyone's welcome, but we sort of safeguard it a little bit just so it doesn't turn into a bun fight. Though it does occasionally turn into a bun fight. But, it's sort of a safe bun fight. Soft buns.
Yes. No hard glazing.
No. No crusty rolls, just soft buns.
No currants.
Definitely not. And we often will sort of say what we're going, we're talking to this person, anyone got any questions, any thoughts? And we asked about yourself and referenced the chapter in the book and stuff. And I have to say, it's probably been the most talked about post we've had, because for a long time, if ever. And some of the key things were obviously adoptive parents felt really passionate, but there was some adoptee voices on there, and they raised some really interesting points in terms of, well, the question I put was the question you put: if adoption is the answer, what is the question? And that's the title of your chapter, and that's kind of the theme that runs through it. And one of the adoptee sort of questions was, as an adult adoptee speaking, saying, when do I get a say? When do I get a say in terms of my permanence, my story, my choice in terms of, do I want to remain attached to these people that I was grafted into against my will?
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
that seems, it's not a question, it's just thoughts. And I was thinking about, it feels like society is ahead of the system right now. In that I think that if you people are rightly outraged by some of the practices of adoption, and quite when people understand adoption, they kind of go, "Oh, is that a good thing?" Contemporary adoption. So, are we in a position which reflects back to the review? Did the review miss a trick when it could have said, "Hang on, what is permanence? What does permanence look like? What is a model of permanence?"
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the biggie. I mean, I didn't get asked to write the permanence chapter. I tell you what, I would really, and I know you've had Paul on. Have you had John on as well already, or
no? It's just you and Paul, but we're open to anyone coming on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my chapter sits in between Paul Shuttleworth's, which is focused on kinship, and it is absolutely. I again would encourage anybody to read that chapter. In fact,
fantastic.
I think, quite honestly, anybody who's working in fostering and adoption and looked after children, it's unseemly to recommend my own chapter, but really should read those three together, because and then what John has to say about fostering and residential care. And again, it was interesting when we when Christian and Robin were kind of putting the book together, they were obviously trying to make sure there wasn't repetition in the content, because we were obviously writing separately.
Yeah.
And actually they asked us if the three of us would maybe link in with each other. And we had a Zoom call, and we only needed one call. We didn't need to keep checking in just because we realized that, we were kind of close, but actually we weren't going to cover exactly the same area. And it was useful. And I think that helped probably locate the three of us and stay clear of each other. And again, you got to give credit to Christian and Robin as editors, because they saw all the content as went along, and I think they've managed to shape it into something that doesn't feel like I've just read that in the previous chapter. Yet you can see in exactly what you've asked me about, which is permanence. You can actually see the pattern running through that, and what does it look like? Because again, an uncomfortable area we don't talk about is, well, what if permanence is actually residential care for this young person, and they're now 14 and they're going to be in residential care until they're 18? Is that permanence in the way we mean it? Or are we going to do the McAllister fig leaf here again and say, let's find two key adults for them and make sure that's all going to be tickety-boo for the rest of their life, simples, no worries. I'll magic that up for you.
I think you're right. You can't have that conversation in isolation then, can you? You can't separate children. Have we got a system that's sort of trying to squeeze square pegs into round holes of this child is 4 and they will never return home, therefore it's adoption?
Absolutely they are, because I mean, again, look, I live in a jurisdiction where there is culturally and within the system here, and particularly on the statutory side, there's a long-standing reluctance to look upon long-term fostering as a permanent option.
Yes. Definitely,
and even more so where that's involving long-term fostering through an outside agency.
Doesn't that reflect research, though, that said that actually there is long-term fostering is quite rare? I mean, you work in probably a very bespoke.
Well, I don't know. Is it? I mean, this is I think there's a lot. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think our service is different. I in terms of, like, if we can use the stability word, 2/3 of the children with us have been with us for more than 2 years. And I have, and most of our, children coming to live with us end up probably staying long term. We have a very low, low breakdown rate.
But that's not typical, is it?
It's not, but that's also because, the system's running in a particular way. And some of those breakdowns might be avoidable if you put the right resources in and provide a level of support, both financial and social work and other services that would sustain it, and you matched better.
I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I think that for the vast majority of children, that model of permanence with with foster family is great, and if it can work, but there's so many moving parts to that. It only takes one. It feels like it's not permanent unless there's an order there. It feels very fragile, constantly fragile.
That's the danger of adoption, isn't it? And it's the magical thinking that I see in colleagues around. Oh, we've got a care order now, so tickety boo, we're sorted out. We've got an adoption order now. Oh, that's permanent.
That's it done. Yeah,
it's not. It's not. And also, it's really awkward because again, when I went into write the chapter, I thought, and I nearly wrote it in that way. All these statements are true at the same time, and this is what makes it complex. So, and I do want, it is right. There are adoptees who are in pain and angry, and we need to hear that. And things have been done wrong, and things will probably still be done wrong, and that needs to be recognised. And any conversation about adoption needs to involve adoptees saying, what do I think would work for me? And it also needs to take account that there's diversity of adoptee voice in the same way that there's diversity of adoptive voice. You and I may be on, in a thought bubble here, but, ours isn't the only view in that.
Absolutely. And I've, like you said, that the internet's not a great place to find out what's really going on, because you get an extreme of view, don't you? You get a certain type of adopter, you get a certain type of adoptee, you get a certain type of birth parent. They're not necessarily representative of the whole community. They may be representative of a passionate corner of that community. So
I suppose I was just thinking about again, like and it's certainly in my own practice experience over years, is the children who are placed with foster carers. And it maybe it starts out as this again, start as short term and end up long term.
Yeah.
But, you've had children who are saying, the plan then is long term fostering, but they're saying, I'd like you to adopt me. Why can't you adopt me? In a sense, what are they saying to you? They're saying, and I suppose they want that kind of reassurance that this is permanent in a way. And I suppose, again, that's what I was playing around with. And I'm not saying I've got an answer, but I think there's a useful discussion to be continued to have about how do the legal bits of it underpin the permanence? Because one of the reasons, and I've had it in the last year, you've got social workers saying, well, we need adoption, because adoption is necessarily the right thing for the child. But the key thing is it protects about anybody coming back and unraveling this legally. So we bring all the weight of that, the baggage that comes with adoption, really to achieve that end, which is, to unpick that, you might say, well, if the legal reassurance is the thing, is the way the law is shaped right, and should we have more of a graduated kind of, edging up to more and more, the way you get delegated authority, and then maybe you get more on top of that, and then maybe you say, and this is where again we're stuck in our kind of Judeo-Christian legacy on this, in the West, I was picking up sort of in Islamic culture, there's more of a concept of wardship. And that kind of took me back again to many years ago when I started practicing and wardship still existed. And I was a child's guardian in wardship as a social worker. And all those things that were there, and sort of that great phrase, the inherent powers of the High Court, which basically means the judge got quite a lot of latitude to say, you can't do this and you can do this and stop that and those kinds of things. And that was supposed to drop into the Children Act and the Children Order for us in terms of the Article 8s. But in a way, they've got quite codified and quite rigid. And even though, again, the way, we've freed things up with placement orders to speed up adoption, but the whole thing is still quite, it's particular steps, and that's it. And again, so where is the voice of the child in that, and the thoughts of the child and everybody else, and how that might shift over time? And again, that question that the adult might ask, as you said, the adult who's saying, well, when did I get to decide? Well, maybe that actually might have been a lot clearer, that that's where the child was at that time, and it was less of a thing that was kind of done onto them. But everybody was, if the decision is very clear that there is no way in anybody's consideration these children should be going back to birth parents or to a birth family in the broader sense, and this is what we've invested in, then that's the decision, and somehow that's honored, and it doesn't preclude other movement, but equally it doesn't leave you with this jeopardy of uncertainty, which we all kind of know isn't good either, and
yeah, because I sort of, as I guess all that I do is informed by my experience with my children. Oh, well, not, and also my academic links. I've got these, probably like you, I've got these very two different positions. One is someone who's kind of read a lot of books and thinks sort of theoretically about this. Then I've got my role as a dad. And the sort of the two sometimes feel not in conflict, but one is head, one is heart. And I know that there's, especially when my children were younger, that their need to be claimed and belong was profound. And they expressed that quite profoundly. As they've got older, that's not necessarily as a bigger part of what they need from me. When they were 3, they wanted me to be daddy. And they wanted to be part of us and, belong. When they're 13, and I guess that tracks child development, doesn't it? That when they're 13, they're starting to pair off, and it's quite clear.
But when you're and what other people,
and
what other people who maybe aren't adopters need to hear and understand is, and particularly professional colleagues who are not adopters and haven't done it, that always comes with the extra bit. Even when your child, I think, is on a normal developmental track, and there's not other, because often again the other thing, our children are overrepresented with levels of disabilities and that push them off normal milestones anyway. Even if your adoptive child is following on a sort of a fairly normative emotional, social, psychological, puberty developmental profile, I mean, that's difficult for you, and you've got the rejection and forming identity and all that. But every stage, and even the toddler ones, they always come with more. There's because of what they're bringing with them, and it doesn't matter if you had them from 2 weeks old or you got them at 5. There will be things coming with them, and it is to do with trauma. It is to do with early life experience. It is around how, that there was that kind of breach and that severance that, our psychoanalytic, psychodynamic colleagues will talk about, primary wounds and, that, and you can't, and it is in there. And, so it is different. It is different. It's like different, but the same. It's like when you're sitting with your colleagues and you're talking about your kids, and you're kind of, and if you start talking about yourself, that's okay. That's normally, but there's another. I know. I live the other edge of that,
isn't it? Yeah.
And the kids know too. They do know themselves. They work it out. Sometimes afterwards. But it's there. It is different. And again, that's where, I think that's where, and that is the tragedy of adoption. So when you're doing that with long-term fostering, you're kind of doing very similar things. It hasn't got the baggage of necessary where you're taking all the flack for now being the parent, and taking all that stuff. But, I'm doing that, or my colleagues in my service are doing that with foster carers, and they're around still. Whereas, if your child has arrived when they're 1, 2, 3, and now you're 14, who's around for you? Adoption UK. Al Coates online, handy advice tips. I mean, it's like, and it's a desert. It is a real desert. And then when you start to get into real diffs, you go, I always said, it's like you had to go through the front door again. And I'm thinking, but you know us and you know him,
He once belonged to
even
you.
though you're pretending you don't know him. You use the word skin in the game. You have skin in this game, even though you seem to have vacated the pitch. Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that there was an interesting part in your book, in your one of your sort of subheadings was, what is adoption doing well? What is it not doing well?
The good, the bad, and the something else, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I thought I find this really fascinating because it's like you said, we're speaking totally from an adopter perspective, and I think that we're not necessarily representative either, are we? We're quite peculiar in the sense of we both work in fostering, we both are adopters, and we're both social workers who've involved in BASWA, separated at birth.
Yeah. The Irish sees a blessing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But so the odd thing is that how representative are we of adopters?
Well, I don't think I'm not proposing to be a representative of adopters. And it's the perspective I've had. I will say something. This is a broader social work point, and I've said it often in BASWA. And there's a lot of moves in BASWA to become more, get service users more involved in the association and more connection and kind of, but also this is true, people who work in social services as well. But a lot of us are service users.
Yeah.
In different guises. I am also a service user of adult social services as well for elderly relatives,
right,
and have been. So we all touch with our own profession and the wider health and social care family. So we do have that perspective. I know it's and it is different because you have all you and I can do our privilege checklist of our sex and our race and our income and our education and blah 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 blah, and that those things are all true. But there is a reality to the experience I have, and I am always very conscious of the privilege of the position of perspective that I have, that I am able to see into both worlds. And if it's made me a better social worker, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
And I think that's, but that's maybe peculiar to me also about the way I think about social work, because I think it is about, if you're doing it well, you're harnessing all of your life experience, not to impose it on others, but to take everything you've got and integrate it into the way you practice and the way you think, and to help you understand and help you deal with the next thing better, because you've got that accumulation. So, and it is, you do have to do that thing where you have to stop, like when you're saying, it's even this interview, which hat have I got on when I'm speaking to you? But kind of to say, I am. In this interaction, I'm an adoptive parent, and I can be very understanding as a professional. I understand the resource constraints you're under, and I understand the system is the system, but this is what we need.
Yeah,
we had support from a psychologist at several points, and a couple of very good psychologists, I have to say, and we were at the point where we was talking to him, and I was sort of saying, what I thought we needed, and I said, like, I'm almost embarrassed to be asking for, maybe I'm asking for too much, and he just said, you're only asking for what's needed. And I thought, thank you very much. Do you know? And I actually, I must tell him, because I use that line all the time, because it's right. You're listening to people and saying, and thinking, oh, maybe it's, it's too much to ask for. Maybe I'm making too much for it. And saying, no, actually, you are only asking for what the child needs, or what you need, or what all of you need, and we're just not very good at providing it, or recording that it's unmet need. There's a 30-year bugbear for me in social work. let's assess, but let's not mention the things that we can't actually do, that are actually needed.
That's the heart of the Adoption and Support Act, isn't it? That you've got a right to be assessed, but no right to meet whatever is found.
I love that. That is, or was it the lads have in the book call it the double shuffle? That is double shuffle.
Yeah, well, yeah. You've got a statutory right to an assessment. Thank you, at last. But you can't have any of it. All right, okay, that's a kick in the pants. Yeah. So, I mean, we could go round because what was interesting in watching the comments coming in, there was lots of people with different perspectives, and I think the probably the most profound was the view of the adoptee who was sort of saying, do I get a choice? But but interestingly, that adoptee was also an adopter, so that's complicated. But so there's not what like
that's
you said
a
very
voice,
clearly.
That's my first response is that's a voice I really want to hear.
Yes. And those voices are out there, aren't they? But often, I mean, we could open up the can of worms, which is adoptee Twitter and kind of some of the factions that how they interact. But
hey, come work in the voluntary sector. I'll tell you factions.
Yeah, it's like a bun fight out there. But some of the voices of some people were. I sort of personally, I flip between thinking. Yes, we could. There's some tropes that we can run out in terms of, well, of course, when we've explored all other avenues in terms of kinship arrangements, when children are incredibly young, when we know that children will never be able to return home to the family, and that we've exhausted every member of the family, or for whatever reason they can't meet that need, then adoption is the only option. But that still doesn't. Is that good enough? Because that's where, in ideal terms, that's where we're at now, isn't it? That we should be able to do that. But it feels like is that happening? What is the evolution of adoption? Or does adoption need to be sort of a stake through the heart and something new built?
I don't know is the answer. I kind of know what we're doing isn't quite right.
You were meant to know, Avery.
No,
I know. We got you on.
I didn't come in as that was the whole purpose of the thing, was to, for exactly the reasons you've highlighted. There are so many voices, and I don't. So it was what you said about sort of the disappointment. I pointed out your disappointment with the McAllister review on this. You kind of went, "Oh, I missed the fact that they didn't talk about adoption at all." In a sense, this wasn't. There's another missed opportunity. It was an opportunity to start a much bigger conversation. In a lot of areas where it's been criticised, saying, "Look, there was lots of really good existing work out there that you could have used as a jump-off point and amplified." So, hey. Breach and Anna, not just because I like them, but that was a really good piece of work. And it would have actually been if the government had actually taken some ownership of what Basil had done, they'd have had the weight to put behind it. And then if you'd actually talked to people who knew something about something, then you'd have had a conversation that involved adoptees, adopters, people working in the field, and start to say, so. And maybe ask this question: Is adoption fit for purpose? What is permanence in this? What role do these? When and it's that moving target. The children who can't be cared for by parents, or for a period of time. That's one thing, and they might return. And again, Paul's chapter is so important because it goes after exploding myths about kinship. Because it's almost like the shibboleth here is that, and of course we're all going to agree to, children should stay with their family of origin where possible. And if there's the common sense position is that, a kinship arrangement is a good idea. But we also know, those of us who work in the field, that there are a lot of families that's not the right thing for those children. And again, I think, again, when I was being trained in the children order, and also when it came, I think, sort of later on when there was kind of like a court review of how we do this, it was kind of saying, you're supposed to be coming to court not with like one option, but to look at all the options and to work out what is the best one for this particular child at this point, rather than have dogmatic positions that this is always the best, which, that was why when you moved towards saying adoption is a gold standard, it was the most wrong thing to do. And I suppose Paul's piece is a bit of a riposte in the other direction as well, which is saying, and this is where the dangers in the McAllister review lie around kinship, is kind of almost saying, kinship's the gold standard. That's what we should follow.
Yeah.
And you get somebody like John comes along, and I know, like, look, in Northern Ireland, we have suffered from dogma around residential care that has left us light, and also hasn't left us then investing in the residential care to become the residential care that it should be. And for some, all these things are true. So at some points, residential care is the absolutely right thing for some children, and they will flourish in it and benefit from it if it's the right provision. And some of them, it will be the thing that gets them back home. Some of it will be the thing that gets them then into a foster family or a kinship place, whatever that is. For some of them, actually residential may be the best thing until they're 18. And that, and then that raises a whole load of other questions, which also cross over into, the whole, let's get everybody ready for independence at 18. And, and again, wave goodbye to the young people. Because I also work in like the 16 plus space around housing, or non-housing, as I like to call it. And you kind of see that it's just like I'm very cynical at the moment. I just think we do a lot of talk about caring about things, and actually all the evidence is that society, we don't care. Because if we did care, the young people that are in the supported accommodation service I manage, and the floating support service we have also in our services here, those children, young people, wouldn't be in the state they're in, and they'd have a lot more options in terms of where to live, types of support, access to mental health support, access to drug and alcohol services. The evidence is we don't care.
Yeah, and we're not, and I think, full stop. When you're talking about residential care, you made me the sort of the questions you're asking about what children need and whether that would work for certain children. And I think that drawing us back to adoption, is it that perhaps the criteria for putting children into adoption is actually too narrow? Is that we are too broad? Probably too broad is the right way, in the sense that we look at age of child and current circumstances of family.
I think it's both. I think it's both those things, and I just think it's distorted thinking.
Because I was wondering, as you were talking, I was thinking, I know some children who've been adopted, even very, very young children who actually they never wanted replacement parents. They wanted adults in their life that would look after them, but they didn't want a new mum and they didn't want a new dad. And the nature of their biological family was that severance from it was probably not helpful, but they needed somewhere permanent, with a real sort of
and that's where long-term fostering can, in a way, what I wonder is if the model is that children come into fostering, and that may have a number of legal, over time you find what the right legal frame for that is, and maybe that is adoption. There are some children who maybe, but again, our adoption numbers here are very small, and they've been falling off in England. And that's maybe because the final insight is actually that really clear cut. This child, immediately adoption is the right answer, is not a solution you can arrive at quickly with confidence, and maybe nor should you. I suppose the other bit I was troubled, and I think we're all troubled by, is the legal fiction it creates, of around identity and birth certificates and all that kind of stuff. And again, that's why not that I propose to be an expert, but it kind of left me questions. Well, what are these other models in other countries like around giving, do you have a form of wardship that gives the same legal certainty without all that kind of fiction baggage, and which again I think you touched on earlier, what's here for us culturally and socially, going back, well, certainly 100 odd years of doing it this way. And then it also, and I was trying to say in the article, taps into other kind of narratives, which are, rescuing orphans and, Dickens foundlings, and which then crosses over into Romanian orphanages, and, all that kind of, that's swirling around in people's heads and what they think they're doing, as opposed to what is the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, and the reality
the other thing
of
it tapped
lives.
into me as well, and I suppose, we are still, even with the children we're bringing into care without, and moving around in placements, never mind move to adoption, just children arrive with us who have been in care, and we still know precious little about them. And you actually, when you do get them into a more stable and a better matched situation, and where those carers have got better support, both financial and emotional, practical, you start to discover things about who these children are, which only then can you say, the kind of thing you've posed is adoption right for this child, or is, or what level of contact really is possible here, and with who. And again, I think the system's got too many points in it, which it feels quite target focused. So getting that care order is the milestone. Boom, job done. Getting what's the permanence plan? Boom, it's done. And then adoption is the final one. And I don't like to talk about my son's experience, right? Because it's his experience, but it was a shared experience. And it was that thing when you got the adoption order and we got it court, and he went, so we've had the big day, and we went up and we'd gone up to prepare. We'd gone up and looked at court at that. And the judge chose to actually do it in the courtroom rather than in chambers, which I don't know why he decided to do that. And it was like 2 minutes, and my son went, was that it?
Yeah.
And I thought, son, I'm afraid it is, but we went and had a nice dinner,
Yeah. It feels like that adoption is sort of narrowing down. I think effectively adoption is going to narrow down to almost like a niche order for such a minority of children. And that feels probably right. Again, the comments that we saw, a lot of people sort of, I know I've got friends who sort of swung from adoption's terrible to adoption's great, and sort of settled somewhere between, sort of comfortable in this murky area, going, well, actually, my children will ultimately vote with their feet.
Yeah, the only problem with that, and the thing that needs to be up front and center in that discussion is, and it is around power. And it's around power in parenting and meaningful parental responsibility, because, and this is the thing the agencies have to, and the profession have to face up to. There's a real lack of partnership working here, and because it's been the drift into child protection mindsets in everything we do as well. So, right, you can only have this freedom to parent properly if you're adopted, which the cost of that is we wave goodbye to you and you get no financial support. The flip side is you stay in, and I think that's, for a lot of adopters and foster carers will recognize that problem then. And I think I touched on it again in the book, is kind of saying, very conscious sometimes when you're training joint groups of foster carers and adopters, and the ability adopters had to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Whereas foster carers were kind of corralled and harassed and, forced to continue with things that clearly weren't working, were in kind of moral distress over things, that they knew were wrong for the child, a child that they'd maybe had for 5 years, and a social worker's arrived 2 months ago with a perspective that says this is, and you do feel that flexing of power, and, and it's like, well, if we're providing the services, then we need to have some control. And at some point, somebody needs to call that out, and somebody needs to get over themselves.
Or poor quality social worker coming in 7 years in and with a new broom and a new idea, and acting inappropriately. But that is really stark, isn't it? Because I think that you just summed up something really quite well. That's the reality, is that the freedom to act without authority and that kind of that agency as a parent comes at a cost of actually there is no support, no guaranteed support.
Well, look, it's a problem. It's a problem you have in long-term fostering cases where it's double thing. So you, in a sense, the agency is saying to you, "We want you to parent. Go on with the parenting, but we're going to tell you how to do it."
And you've got to ask us first.
Or you go to parent in a way that you might think is a reasonable way to parent, and somebody says, "Oh, I don't agree with that," and I think you shouldn't do it that way. And but also, I mean, those are about. So we've just come out of we were very blessed to have the magnificent Ray Jones do our independent review of children's social services, and a very different experience it was. But I mean, I think he certainly named the problem we've had here, which is we have drifted over the last 15 years or maybe more into being a child protection system, and it infects everything we do. Even we try to do partnership models and stuff like that, we still end up in this kind of power mindset and kind of control and risk, and this is the problem. I do end on a couple of biblical quotes, but the thing that always reminded me is that phrase, I asked you for bread, you gave me a stone. It's kind of, that's what it felt like, and that's what it feels like. Adopters and foster carers have that experience, and they go in looking for what is essentially family support, and they get child protection. And that's not good. And we're not really having an honest conversation about that on any level.
Yeah, and I think that is probably one of the biggest issues that I face. People contacting me on a personal level saying, this has got out of hand really quick. We were struggling, and now we've got a child protection social worker who's probably comes with limited knowledge of the nuances of adoption. Yeah. And then who's probably got that mindset of happily ever after, and comes and goes, why the hell is this not a happy ever after? Why aren't you playing rainbows and unicorns? What the hell's going on? Yeah.
Well, and it says, well, actually, we are making progress because all this stuff's coming out.
Yeah, a distressed child.
It's like, but I mean, I know it's relatively simple to those of us who've walked to the path, but that path is very, very hard at the time, even when your head knows what's going on, and you need really good people around you.
Absolutely,
really, really good people.
Yeah. So in conclusion, there is no conclusion. I think that we talked for an hour, and in some ways we've sort of just thrown it all in the air, but raised some really interesting points. And I guess
that's a good reflection of. To be fair, that's a very good reflection of the chapter. And what it was designed to do as well was to say, look, I'm not, I've got some thoughts, and I've got some thoughts for a bigger conversation. I don't think one person could get there on their own at all. I mean, again, it was like it's one of those pieces of things. I started to look more, and that's how I ended up down the historical route. And it just left me thinking, well, it's either a PhD for me or somebody else.
Yeah,
it would be really, but that I think that genuinely cross-cultural look and a historical perspective would be really useful, because I think it would be a very useful corrective for our own thinking and our own assumptions about what's possible and what's not possible, while also acknowledging our starting point.
Yeah, because it's evolved. We're in an evolution, and that makes sense of where we are here. And but does that also give us hope? That was my last question, really. Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful? Are we going to evolve better?
I hope so. But sorry, I mean, you got to understand where I'm working at the moment. I mean, the system is very broken at the moment. It's very broken.
I mean, I'm in that system as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know what it's like where you are, but I mean, it's as I said today. You don't like to use that. It's that kind of cliche of "I've never known it this bad," but really, 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 it's. I'm 30 years qualified this year, and I mean, I've lived through bad stuff and it's never been perfect, but this is really bad. So I don't even know if people have the headspace to do this stuff, which again takes you back to the nonsense of the McAllister review, in terms of the way it was set up, that in that time frame, it was somehow going to be able to deal with all of this. What we have discussed is the work of one alone, is probably the work of one good solid review.
Well, yeah, and from one
permanence
perspective,
and care, not family support, not early years, not youth services, just to get a real grip on that would be, that would be the work of really solid study. And you would do things like, you would say, let's get somebody, really good in and get them to do a bit of a cross-cultural study for us. Let's have, some really proper conversations across these groups. Let's have some real encounter.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And it feels like the voices of people who've lived through these, who've had services done to them, have had court orders laid upon them. It feels like those voices are the voices we need to really be taking a lead from. And it just doesn't feel like that. McAllister review didn't feel like that at all, did it?
No. Well, I don't know where the adoptee voice was in there. That's for sure.
Just not present. I mean, like this conversation.
Well, I hope, look, I hope if any adoptees are listening to this, that it maybe, I would hope it would feel different, because I think, they need to be given the space to speak for themselves and not me speak on their behalf. That's why I suppose, it's kind of a privacy thing that I wouldn't do that to my son, but also kind of it's his experience to speak about.
Yeah.
I am informed by his experience, what he tells me about his experience, and I listen closely to that.
Like a good parent.
Like a half decent person would do. But yeah, I think, but I mean, it's also, I also think it's wrong. You can't totally invalidate this conversation. And it is actually just interesting the way it's worked out, that the two of us with kind of so similar, that's interesting to me, if it's interesting to nobody else, because it kind of thinks, I'm also not completely off my head here in some ways. And, I think in each other we can hear the things that we both navigated, and that is about trying to be respectful to all those pieces and not say, oh, this is my experience as an adopter and that's the experience of the world. Well, that's just not the way it works, And again, I think that's the pity, because I think Bridget Ann did some really interesting work and some really good starting work, and more investment in that could have expanded the conversation. So adopters and adoptees from lots of different experiences and lots of different points in time could be heard. And that would be really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't apologize necessarily for having my voice on my podcast, in the sense that, which sounds slightly obtuse, but we've never pretended to be anything we're not. And in the sense that I was always quite reluctant to have adopted people on, because I thought I don't want to curate adopted people's voices. I don't want to be the person. I don't want to be the gatekeeper to adopted people. Adopted people are, setting up a podcast costs. You could do it for 20 quid. So I've never, but because there's a kind of a vacuum, we've invited adopted people's voices on. So it's, that we're onto a different kettle of fish, all about, it's all about me again. I'm sure we will be back to this conversation, and maybe now is the time to lobby the Labour government and say, hey.
Oh, did you ask me about being hopeful again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah. Maybe the Green Party.
Yeah. No, I was just, and I mean, this is one of these curious things that we sort of finally virtually met like this, but I mean, I think, and I've watched what you guys have been doing, and it's very valuable. And I think, it has created space for conversations, and, and again, I think it's in the chapter, go on social media, it creates lots of heat, but that's, in some ways, some of that's not bad, because some of that needed to be heard, and, it needed,
absolutely,
you need to honor the pain that's there, as well as the and the views, because they come from something.
I think from my point of view, I think that it's been invaluable. I mean, the worst excesses of those voices, I'm not interested in being called names, but there's an awful lot of voices in there that have articulated a perspective that I'd not necessarily appreciate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's changed my perspective. And I think that would be true. And Scott would probably say the same. And a lot of adopters, that I know would probably express that as well. Anyway, I'm aware that we've gone way over time, and I can hear my grandchildren screaming behind me. It's
Excellent.
that time of night. Yeah, excellent. So Avery, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And I'll encourage
pleasure.
people to buy
Thank
the book.
you.
No, and we will have you back.
And do read the others in there because it's really good. It's really, really good.
It's an easy read as well, so that's good.
Yeah, it is actually. I think everybody's very accessible.
Yeah.
But again, it's some of the stuff in there for anybody who wants more. There's very rich resource material in there for further reading. So yeah,
perfect. And we will link to your Twitter profile so people can come on and tell you how wrong you are.
Excellent. I look forward to that.
You'll get a spring in your step as you open up your your social media, formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and look after yourself.
Thanks. In regards to Scott, when you eventually see him.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.